Hello, everyone. This is the Hartnett Flow Show walkthrough. This week's report is entitled "The Kids Are All Right." And there are some interesting nuances in here to discuss, but I'll start off, just give you a quick overview because I did read through it this time. The report is, in terms of trade recommendation, he's doubling down on his idea to buy bonds, number one. Number two, that is informed from a couple things. One of them is he sees the problems in Japan as a reason to buy bonds. Okay. The second is they had a financial manager survey, basically a conference, a global FMS conference. And from that, he's getting feedback from their clients. This is their clients. This is a proprietary, meeting. It's an important meeting to get feedback from their bigger, savvier financial clients. And their feedback to him was, bonds are a buy. Now, bond festival aside, he's noting that the electorate is changing, and that electorate change is actually conservative in terms of fiscal spending. So the generation after Yellen is not so crazy about spending so much money, or at least spending it on different things than they currently are spending. The other aspect that he's interested in focusing on, well, it's all related, but I think the major theme here is he's noticing that at the client side, there is an intolerance for fiscal largesse starting to grow. At the electoral side, there's an intolerance on the voting bloc for fiscal largesse, and he wants to buy bonds as a result of that. Anyway, I should disclose I'm long bonds, but that's not going to color my comment here because I could be out of that position on Monday. It's not a long-term married trade. Okay, so here we go. Scores on the doors: crypto 36.4%, gold 13.6%, oil 13.4%, stocks 11.8%, commodities 10%, US dollar 4.2%, high yield bonds 2.7%, cash 2.5%, investment grade bonds minus 0.3%, and government bonds minus 4.3% all year to date. Note that crypto has been sideways to lower, gold has been stable to higher, and oil has done a lot of catching up with gold over the last 2 months, something that we had talked about before. I mentioned that the gold oil gap should probably narrow. Now, I didn't know which way it would narrow. Gold could have sold off. Stocks 11.8%. We got that. Commodities 10%. High yield bonds. Remember, high yield bonds are a comment on speculation. High yield bonds are really junk bonds. They're really equities. Investment grade bonds minus 0.3. Government bonds minus 4.3. That spread there says that financial liquidity is still fine. When this compared to this starts to widen, or investment grade bonds start to do worse than government bonds, well, then people are worried about liquidity on the equity side. 3 zeitgeists today. Please return to those. With your FMS hard landing probability down to 5%, aren't you kind of meant to buy the long bond here? That's a quote probably collectively from his clients at the global FMS event. And he was probably asked by them, hey, your chances of a hard landing are down to 5%. So why aren't you buying bonds? It might have been rhetorical, which again informs his opinion on being long bonds. Zeitgeist 2. My biggest worry is a sweep in the U.S. election and a Liz Truss moment. I think this is also coming from, it sounds like it's also coming from his FMS group. The Liz Truss moment, the mini budget event, was not really discussed much, and it should be in preparation for what's happening here. In the nutshell, what it means for us, not in terms of what happened. The Liz Truss moment, the mini budget rejection, and the subsequent collapse of the gilt, that's their bond, and the British pound, were a signal that this way of doing things is not going to work anymore. And we'll get into what this way is in a second. Now, in the US, if you have a political sweep, let's say Republicans win both House, Congress, and presidency, or Democrats, however you want to look at it, although I don't think that's going to happen, you get a mandate, and that mandate can create excessive spending out of the gate. We all know that Republicans, in my opinion, they're not going to stop spending. They're just going to spend things on different things now. But that's my opinion. Anyway, so whoever said this, their biggest worry is that a U.S. election sweep by one party or the other will create a Liz Truss moment. And we're going to touch on the Liz Truss moment in a little bit because it's actually pretty easily synopsized. It is a sign of a changing zeitgeist. It is a big sign. And, well, it's important. All right, Zeitgeist 3, see page 2 for the London Frankfurt client feedback. That must be related to the global FMS, and it's where he's getting his information supporting his opinions. The kids are all right. All right, this is the electoral comment. 2024 is the first election in 30 years in which baby boomers are not the majority voting bloc. 65 million Gen Z and Millennial voters outnumber 50 million boomers. Most important issues for U.S. voters aged 18 to 29 are inflation, healthcare, and housing. Least important, student loans. That's it. That's it. I'm going to say that again if you're listening to what Biden's doing. The most important issues are inflation, healthcare, and housing. That's a combination. I'm going to give you a little political comment here. That's a combination. Worried about inflation is something that conservatives do. Liberals worry about unemployment, if you want to look at that dyad there. Healthcare and housing, that's something that liberals do. So you're seeing, I think it's quite amazing, a younger generation, of which I have 3 children in that age bracket. The younger generation has been shocked by inflation and is now aware of it. And they're not looking at it politically, just going, inflation sucks, we don't want it. And they've also had their awareness raised by the cost of healthcare and the cost of housing. So this inflation, you can say that's them responding to economic reality and Republican underlining. Healthcare and housing, you can say that's them responding to post-COVID shortage of housing, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of view these, just to throw an opinion out there, these are the same thing, all of them. No one can afford housing. That can be lumped under inflation. Okay, it is inflation. It's just inflation that everyone thinks is okay. We don't have enough houses, right? No one can afford healthcare, and that's just going to push for, and that's also a form of inflation, but that's just going to increase the mandate for an Obamacare setup. Now, least important, student loans. Stops there. Don't read that part. I've been studying this, okay? And Biden doing this canceling of student loan debt, very calculated, very calculated. He's not going after the 18 to 29-year-old vote with that. He's going to get it, quite possibly, but they're going to vote, with their emotions anyway. They're going to vote for, saving the whales or something like that. But he's targeting the parents because the parents pay for the college. And they know if the child's going to have the college subsidized, and they're going to have to live at home if the debt can't be paid by the child. The student loan cancellation is geared towards middle to upper middle class suburbanites, soccer moms, and to an extent NASCAR dads. Okay, he's putting money in the pocket of parents. He's taking the pressure off of the parents of college kids. Now, college kids are not poor kids anymore, struggling through community college. College kids are taking out $80,000 and $100,000 loans. Okay. The point is, when Biden gives cancellation for student debt, and we know it's not cancellation, it's just being thrown on the backs of taxpayers, he's really getting 2 to 3 votes out of it. The mom is going to vote, right? I mean, let's assume she's a soccer mom, right? She's going to vote for Biden, right? If it's just this issue. The dad, let's assume he's a NASCAR dad, okay? He might vote when the booth is closed and say, you know what? It's he helped my wallet, so I'm going to vote for him, right? And the kid, they may or may not vote for Biden. They may vote for him because of the money, but they may say, I don't like Biden. I'm going to vote for, I don't know, a Green Party candidate. Or if you're a reactionary to the liberal spending, he's going to vote for Trump. He's going to say, you know what, you guys spend too much money, you know, slackers. Okay, so I think this is really significant, and I spent a little bit of time on it. I appreciate your listening. All right. So this doesn't go with that. This is done, right? Next sentence. Inflation and cost of healthcare housing is politically unpopular for the most important voters. Let me think about what he means by that. Right. Okay. Cost of healthcare housing. Look, unless he's spending money, Biden doesn't want to talk about it. And if he's spending money, he drives this up. See, so this, if you're looking at it from Biden's point of view, he's like, I want to control inflation. All right, I'm going to give people free insulin, which has merit. I'm going to pay for immigrants' housing. That doesn't, in my opinion, has no merit. But there you have it, right? This is a splitting issue on the left. Now, on the right, it's also a splitting issue, but it's easier, right? It's like, basically get rid of government and you'll get rid of the healthcare problems, right? And that'll reduce inflation. The housing, build more houses. This is actually an issue that the right can really own. All right, politically unpopular for most important voters. Investors should not assume perpetual fiscal excess in our view. Okay, based on the demographic changes, based on the Liz Truss moment, all right, which we're going to touch on next to move on from this whole section, and based on the difficulty with what are the more important issues that can be addressed, he's saying that, well, he's not going to call it that, but I'm going to call it that. This reminds me of the beginning of fiscal conservatism, very, very early in the game. But when we came out of the 70s, you remember there was a show, oh, geez, what was it called? I don't know, but what was the name of the actor? Michael J. Fox. Here's a little bit of a culture, callback for you. As we came out of the 70s into the 80s, all the sitcoms on TV, right, most of the sitcoms were about culture clash, like the good ones, like All in the Family, young versus old, right? And the old were older, right? Archie Bunker was conservative, and the liberals were younger, always fighting with their parents. And then in the 80s, a new type of series came out, and there wasn't a lot of them, but I really liked it as a kid. And now I know why. It was called Family Ties. Michael J. Fox was in it. And this TV show got so popular because the next generation of kids were Reagan Republicans. They were kids. Michael J. Fox was not supposed to be the hero of that show. The hero of that show was supposed to be the mother, and the father was a supporting character. That show was supposed to be about the culture clash, but the wise ones were the parents, and the child was being lectured to. But Michael J. Fox was so commanding in the role that the whole series pivoted on his point of view and his pushback. Anyway, why am I bringing that up? Because in the popular culture, as the 80s started to happen, people said, we're done spending, right? And there was a pushback from the younger generation. And the younger generation was represented by Michael J. Fox in that show. Whether they meant it to be a conservative, successful show or not, it ended up being that way. I remember looking at it, agreeing with the kid, and the adults in the room being uncomfortable. And it wasn't because the child was, getting his way like it was some immature teenage fantasy. They put conservative words in his mouth. Now, it was comedy, don't get me wrong, but the adults had a hard time with it. I remember that. And I liked the show because my hippie aunt and uncle were squirming. It was like the whole All in the Family thing in reverse, Anyway, okay, so let's move on.